Hello. Ahead of the 2022 local elections for Reading, Reading Today is interviewing all four party leaders. Now, this is an unusual election for Reading as all seats are being contested. This is due to boundary changes, which has seen the number of seats increase from 46 to 48. In this interview, we're focusing on 5 topics with about 5 minutes given to each. At the end, the party leader will be able to make a direct address to you, the voter. While the candidates have been briefed on the subject areas before the interview, they've not actually been given any of the questions in advance. In addition to this, Reading Today has prepared some ward pages on its website, giving you the chance to find out where you can go to vote and who the candidates are and what they stand for. So with me now is Meri O'Connell, she's leader of the Reading Lib Dem group. Thank you for joining me for this interview.
Thank you for inviting us and giving us this chance to talk.
A pleasure. The first subject that we're going to talk about this afternoon is development. And a lot of the housing policy that we have is dictated to us by the government. The current government has a high housing targets for the South East. It's planning to reform the planning system as well. How do you think a Lib Dem council can actually have influence on Whitehall policy for Reading?
Well, Reading has some quite unique problems with house building. If you look at an aerial map of the Reading area, you'll see that we are built right up to our boundaries. Most of the big new developments are actually taking place at Reading's edges in Wokingham, Shinfield area, and of course West Berks, next to Tilehurst where I am, over in places like Sullen Woods. So I do appreciate that we have a somewhat unique situation with regards home building. I mean, what the Lib Dems would always push for in Reading is building on brownfield sites. We understand why developers don't particularly want that. It's more expensive because of the costs of having to clear the land before putting up new buildings. But these are spaces that are already brownfield. They're not our green open spaces. And in an urban area like Reading, those green spaces are becoming increasingly precious. I think that the COVID lockdown time has shown us more than ever just how very important our green spaces are, and that we perhaps need to put a new priority on protecting them.
Now, you're talking in your manifesto about the need for a balanced housing market in Reading. Mm-hmm. What do you actually mean by that?
Well, at the moment, if you look at our house prices in comparison to house prices nationally, anyone who lives in Reading knows how expensive it is either to own a home or to rent a home here. And so what we'd like to see is we'd like to see an increase in council housing. But for that, we would need an increase in funds from the government, and we'd like to see an increase in social housing. We'd also very much like to see the council sticking to its quotas for affordable housing, so that when any new developments go up, an increased percentage of those properties need to be at affordable rates. Otherwise, you know, when our children grow up, they can't afford to stay living in the area that they grew up in. And as a mum of 3, I don't want my kids to have to move away unless it's for positive reasons, not because they're forced out, because they can't afford to buy a house in their hometown.
Your manifesto also talked about trying to sort out empty houses. How big a problem are empty houses in Reading?
I will give the council officers credit here. I think it is something that they have gotten on top of. We need to stay on top of it. We don't have the numbers of empty homes that we did do a few years back. And as I say, I will give council officers credit there for moving quicker on those areas. But I do think that where there are empty homes, then they should pay a premium in council tax for keeping that home empty, to try and encourage them to put that house back onto the market, to allow individuals or families to use it for what it was built for.
Your manifesto also talks about the need to tackle issues such as pollution, recycling, and access to services as part of the need to have sustainable communities.
Yes.
So, how important is that to Reading's Lib Dems?
Well, up here in Tilehurst, as I mentioned, we've seen West Berks fulfilling its obligations on building new homes by building on the Reading boundaries, which of course is completely legal. But what it means is that those people use Reading services. They don't tend to use Newbury because it's so far away. They'll use the doctor's services, the roads, the infrastructure that Reading provides. They consider themselves to be part of Reading. However, we don't receive any of the council tax from those properties. That goes back into West Berks, which means that in effect, Reading is subsidising people from other areas. So there are issues there that need to be looked at. And, you know, it is a reason why local people struggle sometimes to get doctor's appointments and things like that.
We're going to move on to the topic of roads now. Traffic is one of the downsides of living in Reading. A good example of this is the recent works in Caversham, which has actually caused jams across the entire town. Now, we do need to have cars to get about. And is this just an issue? You know, do we have to put up with jams, or is there a better way?
Well, my mum lives over in Caversham and I'm up in Tilehurst, and so this has I have experienced this problem every time I've tried to see her or she's tried to see me. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and I have nothing but sympathy for the people of Caversham. I think one of the difficulties here is that my understanding is that the council have to provide access for the utilities companies. You know, they cannot not provide access. The issue I have with it is not so much a Reading one, it's actually a national one. If you travel to other parts of the world, for example, in Canada, the utilities companies have to hire the road off of the local council, and they pay for how long they are working on it. They pay for how many lanes they close off, how many meters of that lane they close off. They pay different prices depending on what time of day they close it off. So what you have over there is you have works that take place incredibly quickly, because otherwise the utilities companies pay extra for it. So you have them doing things like working overnight, not working during peak times and rush hours. You have them choosing to close off the minimum amount that they need for the time that they need it for. One of the big frustrations that I picked up from friends and my mum in Caversham was driving past and seeing nobody working. Day after day, there would be nobody working on the bridge, and yet it was closed off. Now, I know that councillors have complained about this to the utilities company. However, nothing ever seems to get done of it. So this may be an issue that we need to take up with our local MPs and get them to bring up in Westminster, because I don't think we should have to put up with this. I think there are more sensible ways of doing it. And I think this attitude that we sometimes have in government of that's just the way it's done. That's the way it's always been done, therefore that's the way it always will be done. We actually need to challenge these views and start rethinking some of the things that we take as that's the way it's done.
One of your manifesto promises is you want a low emission zone for Reading.
Yes.
Is that just a way of penalising motorists?
Not at all. I'm a motorist myself. But I know that there are times when I could have left my car at home. I take it because it's convenient, not because I actually need to take it. Those are the types of journeys that we're hoping a low emission zone would discourage. What it would actually mean is that for those people who do need to use their cars, for whom there isn't an alternative, would actually be traveling a lot faster and a lot more efficiently. So it could actually end up having a very positive effect on those people who need to use their cars.
Another manifesto pledge is implementing a 20-mile-per-hour zone in all residential roads. Won't making motorists go slow increase air pollution? And also, will arteries such as Wokingham Road, which is residential as well as being one of the major routes in and out of Reading, are you intending that all of those big artery roads will be 20 miles an hour?
I would hope that were the policy to come to fruition, we would look at all queries like that. But the evidence again suggests that where you introduce 20 mile an hour, the traffic flows easier. There's less stop-start, so the emissions won't necessarily be higher. And on the interests of road safety, it would have a massive impact. My children are all secondary school age now, and I talk to other mums about how their kids get to and from secondary school. There are a lot of parents who would like their children to cycle. However, they don't feel safe allowing their children to go on Reading roads. And of course, it's illegal to cycle on the pathways. Now, if you had 20 mile an hour as a standard, then cyclists actually stand a chance of being seen. It's going to feel safer. People aren't going to make the same errors that they make when they're traveling at speed.
Well, moving on now to the cost of living crisis, which is a national issue, but the impact of this is very much local. Why doesn't your manifesto have a section on this?
I will be completely honest with you that the cost of living crisis is exactly that. It's a crisis. It's happened incredibly rapidly. I would say that a lot of our policies deal with the cost of living crisis simply by their very nature. I mean, we would like to see and have supportive motions to improve insulation of Reading homes, particularly council properties, Reading buildings. And this would, I get frustrated at the argument that we need more fossil fuels, we need more energy, when actually if we could reduce the amount that we're using, people's bills will not just go down in the short term, they will go down permanently. So to me, this is the direction we should be putting our energy into, particularly if as a council, we're taking our climate emergency that we declared in 2019 seriously.
Oh, obviously one of the things that councils have been doing during the COVID pandemic is helping children and vulnerable families who have been on free school meals, but they weren't in school. They've been ensuring that they have had access to meals during holiday times and when schools haven't been open. What's your strategy? How do you see this developing during the cost of living crisis? What would Reading Lib Dems do?
Well, we would like to explore, although we recognise that the government has cut council budgets repeatedly and ruthlessly. But we would like to explore expanding. This is part of our national policy, expanding free school meals to all children, so that there's no stigma attached to getting it, and so that, you know, every parent is guaranteed that their child will have at least one hot meal a day, regardless of their income. We think it's absolutely essential. I'm a teacher in a secondary school, one of the local secondary schools, and I can tell you that I could point at which children haven't had breakfast in the first lesson, because they're the ones who can't concentrate. They're the ones whose attention is drifting all over the place. And often what they are waiting for is break time so that they can spend some of their free school meals money on getting themselves a hot, nutritious snack. But it shouldn't be that way. You know, they shouldn't have to wait. And I applaud the charities that have worked tirelessly to keep food banks stocked and to keep food in family homes.
Well, moving on to finances now, specifically of Reading Council's finances. In 2020, 9 in 10 local authorities did not have enough money to cover spending plans. Obviously, this is partly due to COVID, but it is a problem as government support grants have changed in recent years. Now, how could a Lib Dem run Reading Council cope with the challenges that lie ahead?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that we have any kind of magic bullet. I wish we did. I think this needs to be changed from the point of central government. I think that councils of all parties have been calling on this current Conservative government to take seriously the problems that local councils are facing. We know that we have to provide certain statutory services, otherwise we will be in breach of the law, which means that any service that isn't a statutory service that we don't have to legally provide is actually in danger at the moment. I really, really dislike the way that we have to rely on short-term funding streams. For example, the roads at the moment, hopefully you have been seeing, they've been improving. We're partway through a £9 million 3-year grant that we had to improve roads. But what do we do at the end of that 3 years? How do we maintain the progress that we've been made? Or do we just have to wait for another 10 years before some funding comes in and we see all of our roads go back to the state that they were in the first place? It's all very short-termism at the moment. And Lib Dems would like to see, again, this is done at a national level, but we would like to see those kind of funding streams delegated back down to local councils so they can actually do proper long-term planning, regardless, you know, of the swings and vagaries of, you know, the political whims at the time.
Talking of short-term things, you know, your manifesto talks about selling off surplus council buildings. Just because they're empty today, you know, doesn't mean they won't be useful tomorrow. So is this a short-term idea? Is it a short-centered idea?
Well, I fear actually that there aren't that many left to sell off in Reading. That ship has largely sailed, but I think, you know, as a council, we have a responsibility to get best value for money for Reading residents. Where we can turn a building into a going concern, then I think that, you know, should be explored, and I think that should be implemented, because it's always better to, you know, keep hold of the family jewels rather than sell them off. But at the same time, there is an obligation on the people of Reading, particularly at the moment. These are very peculiar times we're living in, and I think we've only really seen the beginnings of the cost of living crisis. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better.
Now, your manifesto also talks about the red tape challenge. How do you think this can stimulate growth? And obviously, can you just unpack it as well so people listening in can actually understand it?
Well, we do have a lot of antiquated rules. We have a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through. And there again needs to be a very holistic look at these kinds of things, where the impacts of how one thing affects another, you know, needs to be looked at as a whole. And streamlined wherever possible. I mean, there may be some areas where you cannot cut red tape. You know, if it's about protecting people and ensuring safety, then, you know, I don't want to see any red tape cut. If it means things take a little bit longer, but people are safer, you know, we certainly wouldn't want to see, you know, a Grenfell because red tape's been cut and developers have been given more freedom to move ahead with things. But where it's sensible and feasible, we would like to see a minimisation of red tape. I don't think anybody likes it. I'm sure you come across it in your profession too.
Moving on to the last topic of council governance. Reading's traditionally been a council with a very strong Labour majority. Obviously, you had a shared coalition of the party about 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
But it is pretty much a Labour majority. So do you feel that opposition views are listened to enough, or do you feel Labour ignores you?
I think that we Reading is sadly a one-party state, and I was shocked when I first joined the council, but that was 10 years ago now, because I thought that if somebody had a good idea, then somebody was having a good idea, regardless of which party that good idea came from. And I would like to think that in the council chambers, I will support ideas from any party if they're a good idea and they're going to benefit the people of Reading. However, I do believe Reading Labour have been there for a very long time, 30 odd years, and I don't think they tolerate challenge. There are only a certain few on the Labour benches that ever raise their voices. And in the 10 years I've been doing this, I've never once seen any member of the Labour group either abstain or vote against their party whip. And coming from a party that encourages different viewpoints, I find that quite peculiar, because my own views and opinions, when challenged, often change. You know, when I'm given new information, when I'm offered an alternative way of seeing something, you know, I would like to think that I'm open to changing my point of view and coming at it from a new, fresh point of view. I don't think we've had freshness and new points of view in Reading for a very, very long time. And that's a shame.
In our manifesto, you mentioned that there's free trade union use of council facilities, and you prefer it if those buildings were used by community groups instead. So how is that fair when trade unions are actually helping workers? Surely they're just as deserving as community groups. And how would you define deserving when it comes to community groups?
It's really simply because the trade unions have their own funds. I mean that's all there is to it. It's that trade unions have their own funds. They're there to promote. I'm a member of a trade union. I have nothing against trade unions. I was a trade union rep years back. I'm very supportive of them. However, they have their own funds. I don't think Reading residents should be subsidising that.
And how do you think council meetings and scrutiny of Labour's decision-making process could be improved?
Well, there's one simple way, that's voting more councillors from diverse parties. I mean, that's what I would like to see. If we were in a situation where Labour actually had to persuade and argue for their point of view, then we might see better, I do apologise for the phone going, better decision making. I honestly believe that challenge makes for better decision making and better outcomes for the people of Reading.
Now, it's Friday, May the 6th. Just imagine that Reading Lib Dems, they're in control of the council for the first time in over a decade. So what would be your day one priority as group leader?
It would be to make sure that I muted my phones before I started any kind of Zoom call. I know that's going to be one of my children. I think my day one priority would probably be trying to communicate with the other leaders to see where we could work together on the best interests of Reading. I'm a true believer in cross-party working. I'm not a tribal beast, and likewise I would happily work with somebody else if they were to approach us.
Thank you. That ends the formal questioning. Now I'd just like to invite you to address the voters of Reading and explain why you think people should be voting for Lib Dem on May the 5th.
Okay, I've written myself a little spiel so that I didn't trip and stumble too much. And also because I did want to sum up. Sorry, they're trying every phone in the house because nobody's picking up. It's been a difficult few years to be active in local politics. People often muddle up councillors and MPs. And when people on the doorstep tell us time and again that they no longer trust politicians, we have to work really, really hard to show them that there's a real alternative to the grubby self-serving shenanigans that they see being played out on television every night. I would say that a vote for your local Lib Dem team in Reading on May the 5th really is a vote for something positive. Nationally and locally, people feel lied to and disappointed by the behaviour of those at the top. But I say to those people, don't give up. If you really want to send the government a message, if you want them to know that the current two-party system of bickering and vested interests is no longer acceptable, then vote Lib Dem. Their jobs depend on the ballot box and they'll have to listen to you. Here in Reading, the Lib Dems offer a positive local alternative to the ruling Labour group. We're a party that believes in working across the political battle lines to improve things for residents. We'd like to see a kinder, more consensual politics, both nationally and in the local council chambers. During the past 30 odd years that Labour have been in control of Reading, the Lib Dems have always been a presence, raising their voices to support good policy, offering suggestions for improvements and robust challenge when they're failing our communities. Despite being the smallest party on the council, we use our independence to speak up on all issues that affect your lives. And we're going to keep pushing for sensible policies that will help Reading play its part in tackling the biggest problems of our age, like the climate emergency and the cost of living crisis. We want to see better home insulation to reduce fuel costs and increase tree planting across the borough, making this a warmer, greener and more sustainable place to live and work. If you lend us your vote in May and tick the Lib Dem boxes on your ballot paper, then you could help elect more people from your community to fight for you on Reading Borough Council.
Very much. So, this is one of the leader interviews that Reading Today have been conducting ahead of Reading's local elections on Thursday, May the 5th. As I said at the beginning, we've got ward pages on our website detailing all the candidates who are standing with a little biography and why people think, why they think you should vote for them, which we hope and find useful. So thank you for tuning in.